Dun, 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 dun. Okay, James. So finally, we get to talk about the Matrix. To what extent do you think this Matrix film succeeds as a Matrix film in this era?
So yeah, I mean, I feel like in the original Matrix, it was like the 90s. It was like the end of history. Communism had been defeated. And the Soviet Union was no more. 9/11 hadn't happened yet, and it was like the whole kind of like this is the as like Agent Smith
Yes.
kind of prophetically says now in retrospect, like this is the epoch of human civilization, because it does feel in retrospect that the 90s were like the epoch of American capitalism. The idea in that film was just like everyone was being sold this kind of like lie and illusion, and everyone believed it except for like a handful of special people.
Mm.
Then you kind of like flash forward to like now, and we kind of get reintroduced to Neo being like locked away in the Matrix. And instead, it's a kind of very different. Being in the Matrix seems very different in this version than in the last version. So in like the last version, everyone just is like uncomplicatedly going throughout their lives thinking they're in the real world when actually they're in a lie.
Mm.
Whereas like in this version of the Matrix, the analyst, like the computer program in charge of it, doesn't seem to like actually want to lie to them and make them feel like they're actually in the real world. He seems just to be deliberately like fucking with them. Like he makes a video game in the universe called The Matrix.
Mm.
And like it's constantly like winking at you to say maybe you're in the Matrix.
Mm.
And like the idea is less to lie to you, but instead to kind of like make you feel like sort of disempowered, sort of like you may well be trapped in a lie. You may well be trapped in a kind of like meaningless world where like all you're doing is like supplying energy to your overlords. But like, what can you do about it? And it's just the idea is to make you feel atomized and helpless.
Mm.
So
So there's something about like, you know, enslavement is
Yeah.
different now.
yeah, it's like, and that kind of, I think that speaks to where we are now in terms of like, I feel like nowadays, in the 90s, people believed in the system and they believed in like capitalism and they believed that. Whereas like, I don't think anyone, at this point, I don't think anyone believes in that anymore. I think everyone's like, oh, the climate crisis is going to kill us. Oh, this entire way of life is doomed. But we don't feel like we can do anything about it. So I think like, to me, like what the sort of Matrix Resurrections is doing is sort of updating that metaphor to now, where it's no longer a light anymore. It's just like like the scenes where the analyst is talking to Neo, he's like gaslighting him in the classic sense, trying to make him feel like crazy.
Do you think this is like a bit of a segue, but like I just feel like there's something about the time when this film came out.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when the first film came out, like the end of the 20th century. I think maybe there was a part where people wanted there to be this great unknown after the end of the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the film kind of tied into like this notion of awakening into the real and like sort of rediscovering like what reality, what the truth is.
Mm.
The power of like the film coming out, just like the fin de siècle, this like kind of transition from analog into digital as well. There's so many things that coincided with the release of the first Matrix that made it so powerful. And there's something about like the fact that this just Resurrections came out like in 2022 where like everyone's just jaded.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like the world didn't end with the Mayan calendar, for example, like, you know, and like we've
As
like,
we all hoped it would.
as we all hoped it would, and like the pandemic's been going on. It just comes out at a time when everyone just, it's like, you know, like Keanu Reeves just looks jaded all the time now.
Yeah.
It's like, I kind of
Just
feel
haggard
like
and tired and
whereas
weird.
like in the first film he's like a newborn baby.
Yeah.
Right, you know, just like a deer caught in headlights sort of thing. Whereas now it's just like everyone's just so fucking jaded. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I can't grow like, you know, like a weary jaded beard, but if I could, that would be my look.
Yeah.
So there's something about like the time it comes out, and I think like regardless of whether I like it or not, I feel like there's a nice synchronicity between how the film is presented and the themes and the concepts. As in like the first Matrix film came out at that time and seemed to sum up sort of the zeitgeist. I feel like this film kind of does that as well, but in its own way. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I suppose like the question is like, did you like it, or like did you feel like there was a point to the film? Because like the film also asks that question of itself as well.
Well, like just before I went in to watch the movie, because obviously I've been like holding out to go to the cinema for a few weeks, given the amount of like Omicron scares. There are many people like yourself who have seen it before me, and like there was such a variety of like responses and reactions to the film. There were certain moments where I felt like, wow, this film is like, I can see why he said that, and there are some moments where I can see why he said that. And overall, like, I see the film as two things, like a re-honoring. I think that's something that I think you're quite passionate about, and like a reinvention. And I think the re-honoring comes before the reinvention. And I feel like the re-honoring part, which for me is like before kind of Neo wakes up the second time round, where he's sort of debating reality. He's going to see this like analyst, psychiatrist character, like the Matrix is reintroduced. I feel like that part was done really well. And as I was watching it, I was like, they're doing it. Like, they made the new Matrix movie and it's like thoroughly enjoyable and relevant. But then, like, as it sort of enters into the second part, which I see as kind of a reinvention of the Matrix, partly because I'm so fond of the first Matrix film, as a lot of people are, I felt that part kind of falls flat a little bit in many different ways. That I felt overall, I kind of came out like feeling, I don't know, like, given how much it doesn't do for like the Matrix franchise, and given the fact that some of the things it chooses to do sort of takes away from the first movie, which I'm so fond of, like, it leaves me feeling like, did they really need to make this film? But at the same time, like, I can't say I didn't enjoy a lot of it, especially the first half. What did you think?
I chose to try and be Morpheus about it and just have like a total irrational faith that the movie was going to rule. And so I kind of like chose to embrace the hype and go in. And for the most part, I think I was like rewarded. I felt rewarded for my choice. Like I don't know. I found it like weirdly moving and emotional. And I think like kind of what got me, because at the core of it is obviously like there's like the love story between Neo and Trinity. And I think because that sort of, I was invested in that, having rewatched the first three films recently and like carrying that investment into this. I don't know, there's something about Carrie-Anne Moss and Keanu Reeves. The fact that he's got this real softness about him and she's got this kind of like more hardness. They both just have this kind of like respectful intimacy with each other. There's something really nice about their relationship.
Actually, that's true. Yeah, I think that the fact that like Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss is like, you kind of like, we kind of like them as like actors and actresses. Right?
Yeah, they're just very endearing. I feel like at the time we didn't, like at the time everyone was a bit like, oh, Keanu Reeves can't really act, he's very like stiff. And like the kind of like general cultural perception of Keanu Reeves has been like, so it's like he's just one of the most beloved people in the world now. like
yeah, that's for sure.
But I think also it's like, I'm always, for whatever reason, I don't know why this is, but I always really like stories about...
You're breathtaking, James.
Thank you. I really like stories about sort of older couples who like kind of reconnecting with each other and like kind of recapturing like lost youth. In a way, this film is kind of, in a weird way, it's kind of like Before Sunset, because obviously for those who haven't seen it, in like the Before trilogy, it's about like two people who meet on a train, kind of fall in love with each other, and then like the next film is about them sort of like reconnecting and re-meeting years later. And the first film is like kind of they're young and full of possibility, and they believe in the idea of love, and they believe like anything can happen in their future. And then in the second film, they've kind of moved on with their lives, matured, become like adults, but then they've kind of lost that sense that maybe true love is possible. They've lost that sense of hope. And then in reconnecting with each other, they kind of have to make this choice. Like they've kind of had to really painfully let go this idea of that love can be this like totalizing, beautiful thing. And they have now the opportunity to sort of like grab at it again. Yeah. But that's also like, there's a huge amount of fear and anxiety, like, and like sacrifice that is now attached to that decision, which I think makes the second film in that series a lot more poignant. But they're bringing that back to this moment. That's a similar thing. Like essentially, like it's about two people who have become middle-aged. They've lost their sense of kind of hope, and they kind of reconnect with each other, and they represent this possibility of real connection in a world that has denied it to them. But because they've both now reached a point where they feel like that kind of connection isn't on the cards for them anymore, and they've sort of resigned themselves to that. It's like terrifying, the thought of like sort of like when you've lost hope, regaining hope can be like the most terrifying thing of all. And I think the way the film plays with that is really poignant, especially since obviously in the film, in the Matrix Resurrections, there's this idea that there's the sort of residual self-image thing, which is also in the first film, where basically when you're in the Matrix, you kind of are projecting this image of how you would kind of like to be seen.
Right.
And it turns out the way everyone would like to be seen is with a really cool long duster jacket and sunglasses. But like, and then like they kind of have this thing where in the new film, the machines can alter how your appearance seems to the rest of the world. So you can see yourself one way and everyone else sees you another way. And there was something like quite beautiful about the fact that Neo and Trinity see each other as themselves. And there's like a kind of sense at which there's something about that kind of sort of speaks to something, that the idea that you can kind of find hope in a connection with another who recognizes you for who you are in a world where you feel like your own identity is subject to question, like someone seeing you for who you really are. And I think like there's also obviously something that people talk about a lot is there's the kind of like transgender subtext and like gay or queer subtext in these films. And I think that this film like kind of plays into that a lot as well. Trans people kind of perceive themselves differently to how society perceives them, and society is trying to force a sort of like image or role onto them that makes them feel dysphoria or makes them feel...
In relation to what you said about like I hadn't really thought about the film the before films, like Before Sunrise, Sunset. I did think about Brief Encounter. Watching the movie as you had the interaction between the two in the coffee shop. And Brief Encounter is like kind of seen as a bit of a queer film, right? Like, you know, and there's definitely something about the romance between the two that's portrayed in this film that speaks to a lot of like having to hide one's truth. And of course, like I don't know exactly like what the plan was for Neo and Trinity when the first film came out, but like this film definitely focuses a lot around them, like the space between the two people.
For sure.
A lot more than the first movie, or even like the second and third, obviously, because in those ones the romance is readily established. So like there's something about like a reframing of the movie where the first one was more about Neo as this like male protagonist who wakes up, and there's a reframing of that in this one where it's more about like them re-establishing like their truth and their sort of like truthful intimate relationship.
The relationship is kind of weird because it's essentially obviously a relationship between a man and a woman, but it kind of has to be sort of like you kind of have to read it as a queer relationship for it to make sense, because the whole big emotional climax of the film is them being essentially like held down by riot police. And that, to me, like I feel like that was like an allusion to the Stonewall riots, because like traditionally straight people don't have that happen to them. Like when they're trying to like be in love with one another and express that love, police don't usually come in and like start fucking them up, but that there is a history of that happening to queer people. So there's a kind of sense that their love is sort of supposed to be this kind of radical, metaphorically speaking, is this kind of radical self-expression that the system won't allow. I think it kind of helps that even though they're both a straight man and a straight woman, that Carrie-Anne Moss and Keanu Reeves are both kind of like very androgynous and also kind of like have that vibe about them. The one moment that really stood out to me that like I actually was like really moved by was the bit where like Trinity says to Neo, "I wish I was the person you think I am, but like, can't you see that I'm not?" That's not the exact line, but something like that.
Sure.
And like the thing that I found like really moving about that moment was that she kind of obviously understands that other people don't see her as Trinity. And we very briefly in one scene see a reflection of her and she's like a blonde lady or something. And obviously there's a bit earlier in the film where her husband, Chad, which is a very funny joke, but like her husband, when she asked if he thinks she looks like the woman in the game, and he laughed at her. So obviously like people don't see her in this light, and she's basically like saying to Neo, like, I'm not this person, but obviously Neo can obviously see that she is that person. And we as the audience can obviously see that she definitely is that person.
Absolutely.
And I think like part of what the film is sort of speaking to is there's obviously like the kind of love story part of that as well, but there's also that kind of part of like that disempowerment. Like it's kind of speaking to us and how we may feel disempowered in a similar way. We're all thinking like we're not the people that we want to be.
You go on YouTube, right? And it's like how to ruin a franchise. And all that stuff coming out.
It's a betrayal of the fans.
And this, even though like obviously I don't think I love the movie at all. I liked it and I enjoyed it. But like there's a cultural backlash to the movie, which I kind of half expected. even before going to the movie, kind of seeing that sort of discourse around gave me a sense for like where the discourse might come from. Because the first movie, like it's such a it goes hand in hand. It's like the crown jewel in that sort of landscape of like waking up and like discovering the truth and like the buildings falling down at the end of Fight Club sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
It really, I don't know, like it's such an important pillar in a lot of people's philosophical like engagement with the world. But it's also quite heteronormative in a way.
Yeah.
And I feel like obviously since then the Matrix has become co-opted in some ways. And
sure.
And I think that to me is what I call like the re-honoring of the Matrix that happens in the first half of the movie.
Because it's basically like being like, no, this is what the Matrix is actually about.
Right.
Because I feel like a lot of people have read the beginning of the film as like criticizing itself or sort of being cynical about its own existence, which I didn't read that as being the case. I felt like the first part of the film is sort of a repudiation of the ways in which certain toxic elements of like the fandom and society and also like corporate culture kind of co-opted the Matrix. And like taking the red pill, like a load of people have read that as like realizing that Jews control everything or realizing that women only want to have sex with chads. And you have to like either become a pickup artist or an incel. Like that's that in the kind of the online sort of co-opting of the red pill as a metaphor. Obviously, in a way, like it's because the red pill is this really potent metaphor. This idea that like there's this like one like all-encompassing truth of society that if you just have to kind of swallow this bitter pill to realize. And it's going to hurt you finding out. But when you do find out, you'll now actually see things differently. Like that as a kind of metaphor is like so perfectly engineered to be co-opted by like a conspiracy theorists or fascists or which it has over the course. It's just become this like open metaphor that any group can use. And I feel like that's now like this Matrix is like trying to go, no, it's about realizing that you're a transgender communist.
It's a re-ownership of the red pill. And, it's a re-ownership of the work by its authors. There's something really interesting about that in the first half of the movie, that whether it was as a fan necessary or not, it almost felt like a necessary sort of act on behalf of the artists to undertake. And so I thought that was really interesting. Whether it's good or whether it's, the politics of it, I just thought it was really interesting. And watching that part, that was the part where I thought, like, James is going to love this.
Yeah. What did you think, actually, of the new Agent Smith and new Morpheus? I had mixed feelings because I unabashedly loved new Agent Smith, but felt ambivalent about new Morpheus.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Morpheus. Like, I feel like Morpheus is everyone's favorite secret character.
Yeah.
Nobody, when the film came out, like I guess everybody sort of projected themselves as Neo, but we all like fell in love with Morpheus.
Yeah.
As this like believer, prophet, like purveyor of truth, and he is reduced to like a gimmick really, like as a sometimes like fan service, sometimes comic relief, and I think that was one of the sort of the reinventions that I kind of felt. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't like I didn't feel it was out of place, but I just felt like something that I wanted to see in a film titled Matrix Resurrections in 2022 was like Lawrence Fishburne.
Yeah, for sure. I basically was like, whereas I wanted to see Lawrence Fishburne very badly, and I think like. It was a bit confusing, certainly on first viewing, of like who this new Morpheus is and what actually happens. Because, so as far as I can tell, and I was a bit unclear. It's like essentially Neo makes his own matrix within a matrix, and then programs within that matrix an agent, but that agent is secretly Morpheus.
Yes,
and he programs him to have the personality of the old Morpheus, hoping that Morpheus will somehow get out of the matrix within the matrix.
It's a bit convoluted, isn't it?
Neo is created. So it's like, it's a bit convoluted. Like metaphorically, I kind of like the idea of like the film is kind of almost saying that like Neo now has to make his own Morpheus.
Right.
Which kind of like on a metaphorical level is kind of interesting, given that like before it was like this guy is going to come along and tell you the truth, whereas now it's kind of like saying you have to like find that for yourself.
But even then they don't do enough with it.
I felt that it was like a really potent, interesting thing they could have done. Which is that what Neo does to the new Morpheus is what the Analyst does to Neo.
Right.
So Neo creates someone, traps them in this little world where they have forced to like live out this like little looped existence as they slowly go insane, and like does it specifically to like for his own purposes, to free himself as like a selfish act. And like I felt like I was kind of half expecting at some point he was going to turn against Neo, because a character with that backstory could have been more interesting. It's like Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who plays him in this like a very goofy way.
Yeah, that's what
which
I
is
mean.
like it just feels like a very bizarre choice, because like that's not what like Morpheus was like.
No,
like,
I
and
mean,
it's like why have they gone for like sort of like
he's like the most serious guy in the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's like but that's kind of the appeal was like he's like unending conviction.
Yeah, and it's like he's like the coolest man on earth. And that's but yeah, and it's hard to try and be the coolest man on earth. I don't know, like so I felt a bit ambivalent about that, but I absolutely adored the new Smith. I like thought Jonathan Groff didn't like whereas like I still really miss Lawrence Fishburne. I thought I was also going to miss Hugo Weaving, but I actually didn't. I kind of love the humor of Jonathan Groff's performance. I mean, obviously Hugo Weaving's performance had a very different kind of humor to it, because it's like he's playing basically like a Saturday morning cartoon villain by the third film.
For me, like when I first saw Matrix, all the way back then, it was like my idea of like the oppressor was like Agent Smith. It's a suit, this like faceless suit man. Whereas like having gone through like 20 years of life journeying and like, working and living in society in my 30s, I now see the oppressor as the new Agent Smith. He's like a narcissist.
Yeah, exactly. He's like your boss who also wants to be your friend. And like he kind of takes that into the interactions, like the fact that him and Neo have this almost like flirtatious kind of banter between them is like great. I like the fact that whereas like Neo obviously kind of doesn't like feels like this intense discomfort, the fact that he's been made to look like someone he's not.
Yes.
Like Smith just accepts his new look. He's just like, I'm hot now. I love this. I'm hot now.
He's younger. He's like,
It's so good. It is very funny that they like. I mean, he even points out like it is like very funny that they basically just like made like Agent Smith young, hot, handsome guy, and then they made Neo into like bald video game nerd.
I guess like in that way, the two characters like Agent Smith and Morpheus and the way they're treated in this film, or retreated and reimagined in these films, sort of speak to like concepts that are I mean, I think Morpheus is he was such a well fleshed out concept.
Yeah.
Morpheus is the same across all ages, and they would have just had Lawrence Fishburne back being Lawrence Fishburne. And I think like that speaks to just like how ubiquitous and like timeless like the character is and what he represents.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I feel through the ages, Agent Smith's change.
Yeah.
And I think in that way, I think it's a reflection of, like, the archetypes.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe, like, it's somewhat of a failing that they couldn't find a way to do Morpheus, but maybe it's also a reflection of, like, what the character represents.
Yeah.
That ultimately, like, 20 years on, a version of Morpheus wouldn't exist. It would just be the same Morpheus. And as a result, the best you can do is have a sort of a version of Morpheus that exists in this universe where Morpheus is still like honored,
It felt very weird to see everyone just calling the new Morpheus Morpheus. Like I would have thought he would have wanted another name. Like everyone's just going, "Hey Morpheus," and I was like, "That's not Morpheus." Like I don't know. Like I mean, yeah.
And then you see the shrine, right?
The shrine to Morpheus, yeah.
Maybe if they just like didn't have new Morpheus, but just had the shrine,
that
and,
would be
and just called the new Morpheus character something completely different, who's trying to be a new Morpheus.
Yeah.
So maybe that was like a bit of a creative misstep. I don't know.
Yeah, it was difficult. Yeah, it made me more long for Larry. Like I just wanted him back. I just feel like shit. I just want him back. Other than the Morpheus, one other thing that I thought was sort of lacking in this film, although I guess it's sort of questionable. I'm actually not even sure what Lana Wachowski was like going for with this aspect of it, but there's like the action scenes compared to like obviously like the action scenes in like the first film and in Reloaded are like probably amongst the greatest action scenes like ever in the history of cinema. And there's like nothing in this film. Like there's nothing in this film where you're like no one's gonna be like, oh yeah, the train scene in the same way that they go, oh the highway scene or the lobby scene. The thing that felt very frustrating to me about these action scenes is sometimes you'd see like what looked like cool fight choreography, but the camera would be like panning away from it, or like
yeah, it's
like,
true.
like in the like this scene, because obviously there's this scene partway through where the Merovingian from Matrix Reloaded shows back up, and there's a big fight that happens
with the exiles,
with all of the exiles that are supposed to be from like the kind of Reloaded, and basically like they keep cutting away from the fight scene to just close up to the Merovingian, who's now like a tramp, just like ranting about like sort of modern culture being bad. And I was like, is this just like a deliberate joke? Are they like, is that I felt like that felt like the first real proper fight scene of the whole film.
Yeah.
And it felt like they were kind of like it felt like Lana Wachowski was like deliberately sabotaging it as a joke, or like cutting to it, because specifically because the Merovingian is like ranting about how like older culture used to be more refined, and like how like Hollywood movies are bad now.
It was very it was too on the nose, wasn't it?
Yeah, just like I didn't like that. That was just a bit.
I felt the film was very deftly handled and finely poised, and then it became very like blunt very quickly.
Yeah, that just wasn't that sequence just didn't quite do it. Although when it then goes to Neo and Agent Smith fighting in the bathroom, I thought that was like decent. Again, it was like nowhere near anything in the first film, and it was very clear. There was also a lot of the choreography was very clearly like taken from the first film. Although like the thing that would have taken the film over the top into masterpiece territory would have been if he did the throat chop, where he, like, when he tries to punch Agent Smith, he catches the hand and then he just flicks it. I mean, the thing
so it was missing the.
That would have taken.
It was one away from being a masterpiece.
If during the fight it had been at the point where Smith was about to win and then he went, that would have been. I think it's just that is still the funniest moment in any fight, because it's just like what, like I've literally like done it to myself like 50 times, and I swear to God, there's no way of flicking your fingers into someone's throat that can even vaguely hurt them. There's no way that even caused any pain or discomfort to him at all. And his reaction, but yeah.
So that's probably for you, the one thing that if there ever is another Matrix movie, you would like to have in the movie.
Yeah, I feel like the whole motorbike chase sequence at the end kind of got me. Even though it was like right near the end of the film, I felt like that was the first time where I was like on the edge of my seat from like the action and suspense.
Yeah, some of it was good. It was just not like, but there wasn't anything, obviously you can't like have bullet time for the first time again. You can't have like the zillions of cameras going off.
Like no one had ever seen that before ever, and you can't do that every movie.
Yeah, right. You can't show something that's the limitations of creativity when it comes to reopening up a franchise like this. And I don't know. I just feel like for me, like I really enjoyed it. It was really really interesting, especially the first bit. But I just felt like towards the end, especially, did you stay for the end credit scene as well?
I did stay for the end.
And it just felt that kind of summed it up. It kind of felt like it became a bit too disposable for me. Like the 15-year-old, 16-year-old in me, like really like was displeased at that.
To me, that was like a sort of joke at the expense of the idea that obviously Marvel movies, people have come to expect like the end credit scene to be like a mind-shattering Easter egg, or like a hint at what the next film is going to be, or like being a fan of like a franchise now has become less about loving the individual movies themselves, but seeing the movies as like incarnations of like the wider lore, and like looking for like hints of what's going to come next.
Okay.
And to me, like that's what the film was making fun of a little bit, because I was like, I assume that it was like they were hoping that a bunch of people would be sitting there going, I wonder if they're gonna do some kind of like mind-blowing drop. And then it was just like a really bad, like a really dumb, bad, unfunny joke. Right. So it was basically just deliberately trolling people, which is kind of funny, but it's also kind of
it's throwaway.
There is some really silly humor in it. Obviously, there's the fact that Trinity's husband is called Chad.
Yes.
Which is obviously a reference to like the Virgin versus Chad memes that specifically come out of like the incel community, which co-opted the red pill. And then there's the fact that the guy who plays Chad is also called Chad.
Oh, no way.
And he's the director of the John Wick films.
Oh, no way.
And he got his start from being one of the stunt people in the Matrix films, and he was specifically Neo's stunt double. And so he was a stand-in for Neo. And then in this film, he is literally a stand-in for Neo as Trinity's husband. So that's like a fucking 4-layer joke. But it's also a very dumb 4-layer joke.
That kind of, that's interesting because it's not like, it's like something you can sort of appreciate after the fact. Whereas
the other very funny dumb joke was that obviously they have the Rage Against the Machine song in the end credits, which is the same song that they had in the original. But in this one, they do a horn-based cover of the Rage Against the Machine song that was specifically performed by a band that went viral about a month or two ago. Uh-huh. Did you see this?
No, I didn't.
So this like Rage Against the Machine trumpet band went viral a month or two ago because the lead singer invited one of the fans up on stage and then pissed on his face. So and there's the footage of it went viral. Uh-huh. So because she basically like invited a guy up on stage, squatted over him, and then she just pissed on his face. And it's one of the weirdest pieces of footage I've ever seen because it's the most piss that's ever come out of a person. It's literally like a fire hose goes off and it just like gushes on his face.
Okay.
And then, so that band became famous because of that. And then I have to believe that Lana Wachowski was, like, in the fucking editing bay, saw that, cracked up, and was like, we have to use that song. And I feel like they put the end credits music as that.
What you just said gave me a deep sense of, like, that's enough internet for one day.
Yeah,
and I haven't been on the internet today.
I feel like there's, like, a lot of just dumb internet shit in this movie that I feel like basically Lana Wachowski, like me, basically is probably spending too much time scrolling on Twitter and then just putting dumb jokes that are allusions to those things in the film, which I don't know if that's a good thing, but it's funny.
So what do you think this is better than Revolutions?
Okay, my personal ranking of The Matrix is, I think now I'm going to say, this is like a big planting my flag in the ground. Obviously, best Matrix film is The Matrix. Yeah, it would be absurd to say anything other than that. Then I was also obviously torn about whether this or Reloaded. I really like Matrix Reloaded. Reloaded's got some amazing moments in it, and I feel like Matrix Reloaded is like conceptually, maybe even I like what it's doing on paper more than I like the original Matrix. But in terms of execution, the original Matrix is like a perfect film.
Yes.
And The Matrix Reloaded, in terms of execution, is a deeply flawed film that has some like scenes that don't work in it. So
and like, some scenes that are really
good. That really good. Yeah. So it's like so I was like torn between it. Do I like this or and I feel like I actually think I prefer this because I actually found this, like, I don't know, I maybe it's just like sentimentality, but I did find like the Trinity Neo stuff in this like genuinely moving.
True.
So because I'm like I'm a soft old man. And
I think that angle actually, like, as you've teased it out a bit more for me. Like, I feel like I did really like how much more they go into like the power of their relationship. There's something quite, I don't know, like gentle about it that I really appreciate. Given that, I think that there is something a bit more to be said about what this offers, in a way that when I first watched Reloaded, like, all the back then when that first came out, it was a feeling like, oh, this isn't the Matrix.
Yeah, I mean,
but subsequently when I did watch it, when I did rewatch Reloaded, time and time again, like each time I enjoyed it more and more.
I mean, I feel like the thing about Reloaded, I mean, we could definitely do another thing about Reloaded, so it's probably not getting into it. Sure. But the thing that makes Reloaded kind of really ballsy and great is probably the precise reason why me and you and almost everyone who saw it, especially anyone who was a teenage boy, was like, what the fuck at the time?
Yeah.
It's like the fact that Matrix Reloaded like deliberately ends on a bummer, downer note, and it also deliberately like there's a scene where basically like the character just sits in a room and explains to Neo that the whole events of all of the first film were just all part of the villain's plan. And it's like, it's deliberately sort of deflating, killing your buzz.
Right.
Which is a very ballsy thing for a film to do. And I think if you're going in to Matrix Reloaded, like, the thing is, like, people would probably love Matrix Reloaded if it ended shortly after the highway scene. If they just wrapped it up, like, people would probably think, oh, that's a great film. But like, the fact that they'd have, like, just like a guy come in and just kill your buzz, which is genius, but also like, not very satisfying. It's a very deliberately unsatisfying ending to a film. But yeah, I think for me, my personal ranking is Matrix, followed by Resurrections, followed by Reloaded, and then unfortunately Revolution's just, I like Revolutions. I like some of what it's doing. There's some cool bits in it, but it's just not as good. It's just a significant step down from the others.
My lazy ranking would be like The Matrix on its own echelon, on its own like level.
Yeah, for sure.
Like Matrix tier, not even like S tier, but Matrix tier.
Yeah.
And then like S tier being like the highway scene.
Yeah.
And then like kind of like A tier being like, I think it's probably kind of a bit of a toss up between like Resurrections and Reloaded, and then Revolutions is just okay. Like it's I think it's a good movie, but too much of it's just like CGI fighting and like exposition. And
I mean, it tries to do a cool thing, I think, which is like obviously the whole Battle of Zion. The sort of thing of it is that Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus don't really have much of a role to play in it. And I think the idea is like the earlier films were like, oh, this guy Neo is going to come and save you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think like the third film is trying to be like, oh no, it's not just, even though Neo is the kind of ultimate martyr figure, he can't do what he needs to do to save you unless everyone participates, and it's like a kind of egalitarian thing. And it's instead of being like, here's a mythic protagonist to save the day, it's trying to be like, here's a collective group of people all fighting for a better world. And that's a really cool concept, but unfortunately just like none of the characters do you even remotely give a shit about compared to how much you give a shit about Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. Although I do one thing rewatching it that I did actually really love was that Morpheus just has nothing to do. And actually like in retrospect, there's like a really ballsy move. And I really love that like, obviously in Reloaded, there's the highway chase. All of this like crazy shit is happening, and the whole time Lawrence Fishburne is just like, completely like stone-faced, like at no point, like there's like agents like shooting guns like right at his face, there's like people trying to constantly shooting at him, explosions going off, and he just like at no point like does he even raise an eyebrow, he just doesn't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
Then in Revolutions, when like Niobe is piloting the ship and they're being chased by loads of Sentinels, and like Morpheus is in the co-pilot seat, and it's kind of almost like a callback to when he's being driven by like Trinity in the thing, but this time every time it cuts back to his face, he's like he looks terrified, and it's kind of interesting because it's like at that point he's found out that the prophecy was a lie,
right?
And instead of just being like this like icon of just like complete stoicism and faith, he's now just a guy, and he's just like, oh shit, like he's just a guy in the real world, and he's terrified. And I kind of appreciated that on rewatching. Anyway, sorry, that was like probably a tangent nobody needed. We can cut that out. Anyway, is there anything else you feel like we haven't covered? Like,
I think that's pretty good.
Cool. Okay, well that's James and SJ probably signing off.
Bye guys.
Thanks for listening, if you exist. If we release this, we might not release this, but if you hear it, then thanks for listening.